Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the study of the early Christian movement and its implications for the church today. Today we have Michael, our resident ephesiologist. I'm Andrew Johnson, a pastor at Neartown Church in Houston, Texas. And we are happily, joyfully joined again by Jeff Christopherson. Jeff is the Executive Director of the Canadian National Baptist Convention, the Executive Director of Church Planting Canada, and he is the Director of the Sin Network in Canada. And also, for good measure, he's the author of Once You See. Jeff, we are so glad to have you on the podcast.
It is good to be with you guys again. It really is.
And we keep talking about those of you who have been on the podcast several times that you need some special hat or coat or something, because this, I think, is at least your third time, if not your fourth, maybe even fifth time on the podcast.
Oh, wow.
Let's
I can't wait for my hat.
Yeah, let's start talking the Five Timers Club. I mean, nobody's ever done that before, so we can welcome Jeff into that. So, Jeff, man, it is so good to see you. How's life these days up in Canada?
Yeah, well, good. I spend lots of time crisscrossing this country, and I think we're now April 1st, and I've already logged 40,000 miles. So I'm ready not to be on the airplane, but that's not happening in my near future, I don't think.
Oh my! Wow, that's a lot of travel.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, we're glad to have you on and get updated on things pertaining to Jeff Christopherson. And first, I think among many things that we want to hear about is the book. I remember we had you on when the book first came out. Once you see, how's it going? What's the response been?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. The response is really encouraging. I know you're supposed to say that.
As you go into it, can you, if you're our friend and we expect everybody to have listened to all of our podcasts, but just in case they haven't, can you describe what your book is before we get an update on it?
Yeah. So during the beginning of COVID, Ed Stetzer and I did a series of webinars where we're interviewing people from Italy, Spain, about what they were experiencing in COVID and trying to prepare churches. And it was it was crazy the amount of volume it got. I think we had over 10,000, mostly pastors on this. And we ended up, after that series, putting pastors into groups we had 1,600 pastors go into coaching cohorts. And we were kind of guiding them. I sensed the Holy Spirit saying to me in that whole process that as I talk to pastors, most would say, when God called me into ministry, it was for X. And, but I find myself, doing A, B, and C. I'm not doing the thing that God called me. And my life is, and I just sense the Holy Spirit saying, this is the moment, speak courage into the lives of these pastors, begin to fulfill the calling that God has called you to. Who else gets a moment, a pause to be able to rethink so that was the direction. I was sad to say at the end of that time of 8 weeks together, that only 9% of those pastors involved made any attempt at any change.
Really?
91% homeostasis. And,
wow.
And I was very discouraged. I was sitting here thinking, kind of just feeling sorry for myself, all that energy. And I just sensed God saying to me, well, Jeff, you've seen stuff. I grew up in Saskatchewan under the ministry of Dr. Henry Blackaby, who just passed away, and got to experience all of that. Like some of you know, experiencing God and what that happened. I've been around the world and I've seen movements that are happening around the world. I've seen things, and most pastors haven't, and they're just doing what they know. And so I just sense God saying, give them a picture of what could be. And so that was the genesis of this book. So the framework of it is I set things up. It was almost like a marriage between Patrick Lencioni and John Grisham.
Hmm.
The Patrick Lencioni part is set up the framework at the beginning. And so I give 7 temptations that they're things we celebrate, but they're actually things that kneecap us. And then I weave those 7 temptations into a John Grisham novel type novel where I have 3 protagonists. One is a African American inner city pastor and his son, and they're desiring to do something great and grand, for kind of kingdom-esque, and their church votes no. We just really want good preaching. And then the second story is a young pastor in Atlanta, Georgia, whose father is a big evangelical leader amongst even republicanism. He's pastoring a church that's its best years were 20 years before it, and he's looking for a silver bullet to get on top. And then the third story is a Yemenis law student who comes to Christ, joins the underground church, persecuted, ends up in the U.S. as a refugee, and his life intersects these other 2 lives. And the one story ends up being part of a global movement, and the other, the guy has to go through a meat grinder one more time in order to make it through. And so that's kind of sets up the story. I think it's all the stories in it, like the little micro stories, are real and true. They're ones that either I've experienced personally or I've seen. And it becomes, I think it helps paint a picture for people. So the book's called Once You See, subtitle 7 Temptations of the Western Church. And it's a novel.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm stuck back on what you mentioned a moment ago with the 1,600 pastors, 91% of them kind of in that status quo homeostasis posture. Describe what that is.
Yeah, it was like, well, theologically, everyone sort of understood the church as 2 forms, scattered and gathered. When the scattered part happened, nobody had an idea what to do, and no one wanted to fix that. So I prefer deployed and gathered better than scattered and gathered. So everybody's lean to is, well, we can't really be church unless we're worshiping, because really that worst Sunday thing is what church is, and sort of the total miss on what the body of Christ is. And so there was just a deep yearning to get back to normal, what our culture considers normal.
Yep.
And which is actually, can I go on a little rant here?
We love your rants. Rant.
Well, let me do a parallel. So Harlem Globetrotters, right? So went to a took my 2 oldest grandchildren, who were 6 and 7, and took them to a Harlem Globetrotter game here locally and Toronto area. And I was expecting something. Like the backstory of Harlem Globetrotters they started in Chicago. They're as just the Globetrotters, and they started in the late 1920s, and they were they were African American basketball players who were not allowed in the NBA, and their talent was out of this world, and they got such a reputation that they ended up moving to the center of the world at that time, New York. And they, I think 1956, 1958, they moved to Harlem, and they became the Harlem Globetrotters at that point. And still, African Americans not allowed in the NBA. And they went on a run where they invented many of the things that are become part of modern basketball today. But and then somewhere African Americans were allowed into the basketball, into the NBA, but they still had such a reputation that they could attract the best talent, because they would fill stadiums and they could pay players, similar to what NBA players got, and But all of a sudden, NBA salaries went up and up and up and up, and they couldn't compete with that anymore. And so the version of the Harlem Globetrotters that I saw a couple weeks ago, it was like a high school team.
Uh,
It had the all the flash and sound and music and they had all the technology there. But when the players hit the field, it was almost sad to watch. I like
uh,
people I was sitting around were going, really? I mean, this is almost comedic. And like nobody I was sitting with was ever wanting to go or even stay the whole time.
oh,
And
wow.
there was a moment in history that was actually, maybe an aberration that created the conditions for the Harlem Globetrotters to thrive. And when those conditions evaporated, they still were running out of team, but it wasn't at all the same. And I was thinking the same
Wow.
parallel to where we are, because I'm watching here in Canada, I'm seeing pastors and churches grapple with this, and actually some successfully. And it's like when we think of church that most of us want and yearn for, and the 1600 pastors were kind of going, I need to get back to that.
Mhm.
It was designed in a time where the culture was tilted towards the church, where they was a sense where they, like, if you even think back into the late 1960s, a church of, let's say, 500 people had three staff. They had a senior pastor, an associate pastor, and a secretary. And the senior pastor preached and did chaplain work. The associate pastor did administration and chaplain work, and the secretary, did more administration.
Ran
And
everything.
what's that? Yeah.
And the
And
secretary ran everything.
as culture kind of leveled off with the church, staffs all of a sudden began to grow, and there was experts for this thing and that and somehow we had to attract people and get them to come. But we still knew how to do that, and so we were spending more and more money on church staff in order to keep that same kind of feel going and happening. But now here in Canada, where the culture is so drastically tilted away from the church, where it is a social, you pay a social and economic price to be a Christ follower. There's no advantages. There's just disadvantages, socially and economically. That
Mm.
that the way that things are going in terms of what we used to do. In fact, if we really just roll the tape back a little bit, think about the Great Depression, the 1930s, and World War II that followed that. There's a 15-year period of history that the entire, where we were in in Canada, the United States, we were focused on all for one and one for all. It was, in the 30s, many social programs that are still used in the United States and Canada found their birth in that time. And then in that Second World War, everybody was sacrificing for the team. We're all doing this thing together. Coming out of that in the late 40s and the early 50s was this unified complex, industrial complex, where we had industry like the world had never known before. And that was brought into a culture that was tilted towards church. So we understood how to build church complexes like that as well. And churches began to be bigger and bigger and bigger than they've ever been before. And you think about that period of history, it was an aberration. We've been tribal before that. We're tribal. We're now going back to a more tribal kind of sociology. And yet we're yearning to get back to, how do I do church like we had in the aberration days, those glory days that came from what happened in World War II and the Great Depression. And the answer is, we're never going back there. Not exactly like that. And there might be something that happens that actually I think I think a lot of those of us who are on that missional edge kind of look at those days and what came from, and we kind of poo-poo it and say, that was bad. Actually, they were taking what they knew in the context that they were and taking full advantage of it, and in all the positive senses of the word. And but we are today, I think, finding ourselves yearning for those days, and not really looking forward to what is it that we need to be doing now, and having the quiet courage to be able to let go and say we're those days are done. They're not coming back. And what is God doing next? And I think that's what we have to wrestle with.
Yeah, you know what? That's such a great point, Jeff, because we do have a tendency as human beings to desire the good old days, the golden period, at least as we've defined it. And what a great reminder that even those good old days, that they were limited. And as you described it, it was an aberration of what the norm is. And yet, that period of history in North America, we saw significant growth of the church. I mean, the church was multiplying. People were identifying with Christ more. And it was a very positive thing.
Yes.
But we haven't been able to get away from that and shift as culture has shifted. And gosh, I think you describe it brilliantly.
So in your context then, Jeff, I am somebody who falls into idealism pretty easy. I like kind of playing with the ideas. Sometimes practicality is harder. So as you say, those days are gone. Say goodbye. Wave to them. In your context, what does that look like, practically speaking, for churches when they inhabit the waving goodbye? So what are the things they stop doing? And then as they embrace this new era, the one that's still forming, still coming, still moving towards this future, what are some of the practices that they have inhabited to deal with that shift?
Yeah. It's maybe a bit different if it's an existing church trying to find its legs versus a new church trying to start.
Mm-hmm.
But
go for both. Yeah.
An existing church trying to find its legs has to come up with the idea that its primary reason to be is to look at the people in the pews and understand that they're the raw material for movement, and just put everything they have into equipping them in teams, and start to figure out how to become decentralized, less building centric. How do I get my congregation out into the world, and protect them and equip them?
And so when you say teams, you're talking about, again, hearkening back to what you like calling it deployment. You're talking about teams essentially equipped and sent out to do the works of ministry, to
whatever
form. Can you describe what, again, for people who are at existing churches, and when you say this, it rolls off the tongue. It sounds so simple, but can you describe what this might look like?
So, I mean, a lot of times we'll find a person, usually with an apostolic gene, that, rah, we'll go send that person, and that person becomes a casualty. And so there needs to be a sense where we're actually putting people out together in groups, equipping them in groups. And in my book, I describe that. And once you see a picture of what that might look like in terms of its makeup, and a lot of us use the Ephesians language of apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, but something like that. But some way that there's an interdependence of people and strengths and gifts that are designed not for a worship service. That's usually our gifting that we look for,
Right.
But what is it in terms of what we're going to actually bring good news to the community? And so I use these three little monikers that I think help I say we need a different kind of church, we need a different kind of leader, and we need a different level of gospel collaboration. The different kind of church is what I just described. It puts everything it has into that discovering, developing, and deploying teams from within. And so equipping. That's obviously what we see in the New Testament is the role of leadership. And so those who take that seriously, I think, are going to fare better in the future. The second, that different kind of leader, and in that, just normalizing what we see in the New Testament around the world in our own history. We had to invent a word, and it's called co-vocationalism, and where people have a calling to the marketplace and a calling to leadership in Christ's church. And so we begin to standardize or normalize that as we're really not looking for volunteers. We're looking for God-called leaders, and those are the people that we're investing everything into. And so we're not really, we were always going to need some vocational leaders. We're always going to need some people that have a full seminary training that understand what antinomianism is, but we don't need everybody at that level. And so we have bishops and we have priests, if you want that language, and we create an army of priests that we deploy. And then that different level of gospel collaboration then is where in a community, we don't see ourselves as the answer. And so we begin to figure out, how do we network with other Great Commission churches in the area to work together, kind of like your guys are doing in Houston, such a great job of navigating that. I lead a group called Church Planting Canada, which is 27 different denominations working together. And we're trying to figure out, how do we work together so that the outside world doesn't see us as competitors, and we don't see ourselves as competitors.
Right,
we're actually collaborators, and we're working together to that end. And so those three things. So when you think about an existing church that embeds that ethos, which is entirely different way of doing everything, then we have a church planter who is thinking, it's not the cottage industry that we're familiar with. Like, how do I get this thing to a point where, the image I have is a bathtub, and I jump in the bathtub and all my resources are there, and I have to get this thing into self-sustaining mode before the last gurgly slurp goes down the drain of my resources. And so they're working, so hard, and the harder, more difficult the field that they're in, they're feeling like failures because they haven't been able to pull it off in the 5 years. And so just, okay, let's take a step back. We're thinking missionary language now. And I'm not trying to earn an income out of this. I'm actually figuring out where my income comes from in a normal pattern. And so that co-vocational picture becomes, again, really, really important. And then with great credibility, you say, follow me as I follow Christ. I work a full-time job, and look what I'm doing. And you can do the same thing. And I think that's the future, and that's kind of what we're seeing here in Canada. We planted in our own network. This might not sound like much, but it's by far the most in Canada. We planted 38 churches last year, and
that's a lot.
It is a lot, and we're looking at 50 this year by what we see happening, and that's that's a lot. I don't want to say what that is in the cumulative of all denominations combined in Canada, but it's a big chunk of it. And so
now, is that within the CNBC? Yeah. And in the network of 27 denominations, what are you seeing there?
In terms of numbers?
In terms of this idea that you're describing of co-vocational.
Yeah, no, there's so when I was asked to lead Church Planting Canada, when I moved back to Canada, I said I would if I could set the agenda. And the agenda was what I just described to you. And so we've been hitting that for 5 years now. And we have a meeting once a year where we bring about 100 different denominational church planting leaders together, and we kind of workshop some of this stuff. And so many leaders, this is new thinking. Many others, this is like, okay, I think there's been a sense of desperation out there. Nothing's working. And so how do we need to shift? And so this is giving processes and language and stuff for new leaders. And so it's encouraging.
Yeah, great.
One of the questions that I have in regards to how this takes root is, how do you help churches, and I almost want to say denominational leaders too, how do you help them dream differently for the church planters that they're looking for? How do you help them change when they're looking to discover somebody that can take a church? How do you help them make that shift from superstar quarterback to something else?
I don't know, because it's a heart shift. And
it is.
It's not logic. It's do I get validated by producing, something that I can point to as a trophy, or do I really want to figure out movement, the mechanics of movement, and how we can actually see this thing let go? And I think there will always be, I'm watching it here in Canada, there will always be a few churches that everybody can point to as, look, it still works. The old way, it still works. But you dig a little bit deeper there, and the ecosystem of other churches is what they're feeding off of primarily, and or immigration, people moving in, and you start digging into the stats of the death to life conversions of, it's not high. Definitely, if you start doing ratios, it's really low. And so
what you're talking about is demographic shifting, church planting by demographic shift, basically.
Yeah. And so you can find some winners that can take the old idea and make it work and be sexy, but you're finding it, they're just better at competing for market share, evangelically predisposed, and everyone else is paying the price.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I mean, I can remember as a young church planter, a pastor telling me, McDonald's is a good model for us in church planting. And not just the franchise idea, but the competition. Competition is good for churches. And I bought that as a young church planter. I'm energetic. I want to be on the top. I want to be the winner. And so that sort of competition idea kind of resonated with me.
What can we learn from McDonald's? I mean,
the contextual nature of McDonald's is interesting.
It is
too. Yeah.
And what they measure, they don't measure, they don't build a super McDonald's in downtown Chicago and say, look how many people we got coming to McDonald's, because they're not measuring how many people are attending McDonald's. They're measuring how many hamburgers they're selling. And so they figured out, okay, that means we need a McDonald's and a Walmart. We need one in an airport. We need one in a gas station. We need one in everywhere. And they've decentralized because their number one measurement is hamburger sales.
Yeah. And they've become culturally relevant. I was just in the Middle East and went to a McDonald's that I was so surprised. It was unlike any McDonald's I had ever been in. That just the culture of that McDonald's was fundamentally different than any other McDonald's, and it catered to that Middle Eastern context, which was super fascinating.
I mean, you can go to, in Canada, you can go to the East Coast and they sell McLobsters. And as a lobster roll, you pay a lot for it, but McDonald's is selling it. And interesting. Yeah. But I guess the point of the little rabbit there that we chased is, if what we our most, we say is our highest value is the gospel being heard and understood. Then we begin to think like McDonald's and say, how do we partner? How do we cooperate? How do we make sure that we have all kinds of opportunities for the gospel to be, the proximity being a lot closer? And
Okay,
and that's
so
where multiplication comes in.
well, let me be the naysayer. It's just fun. McDonald's sells hamburgers. That's the product. And the coffers stay full, right? They get to point to the hamburger sold and say, hey, we're doing well, right? In the dichotomy that we are talking about, the old way, at least for now, keeps the coffers full. And the quote unquote new way of deploying teams for ministry and gospel growth and all these things that we are fully behind and want, doesn't have the large market share that keeps the coffers full. So how do you have this conversation about resources and for people who are gainfully employed doing this and seeing that if we jump ship to this other model, I don't know if I have a job. I don't know what it's going to take for me to stay gainfully employed and continue to do this thing that I love. And I'm asking you as somebody who's been in it and having to talk to churches and be on the ground as they're shifting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a tough conversation. It's a conversation that's going to be forced, like I just watching here in Canada, it's going to be forced on you. And so you can prepare now, or you can wait till you can't pay your light bills. But no, it is coming. And the good thing, Alan Hirsch and I were talking about this before COVID, and we certainly see it now in Australia and Canada, that the church seems to be getting smaller and poorer and pure and ready for something else. When there's a cleansing, I'm sorry, the word where nobody is a part of the church. I'm doing air quotes in an audio format. When no one is part of the church for the benefits that are associated with it, but they're actually understanding there's a price associated with it that they're going to pay to be a part of this body, and still want to be and lean in. There's a whole different set of motivations that happen, and so as long as we're building churches designed for consumers, we'll never get there. But when the consumers stop, like what we're watching here in many of the churches that are more attractional based, is that after COVID it was always been a harder and harder and harder job. Mm-hmm. But after COVID, the people, because here in Canada we had almost a 2-year lockdown. There was a lot of reevaluation of the people who are leaders and giving the volunteer hours in churches, going, do I really want to go back to that manic pace again? And the answer for many was no. And so when churches began to say, okay, we can assemble again, they were finding that the people who were coming back were the people who wanted the goods and services. But the people who were providing the goods and services weren't coming back. And so there was, many churches are in difficult situations with staff that are, pulling their hair out, trying to go, how do we get a volunteer here? And so I think people are discovering, just by the fact that the necessity of things, that maybe we need to rethink this idea. And I'm talking to people who have been, on the one track their whole ministry life and been the winners at it, and are now reevaluating. But until you feel the pain, you're probably not going to make that shift.
It doesn't provide me with a lot of hope, Jeff. So thank you.
No, I'm just
Um,
saying for the existing. I'm watching for new churches that are, I'm seeing a whole church planting culture happen around me where there's there no people are thinking about this entirely differently. And they're approaching this, co-vocationally from the get-go and not really trying to do that as a band-aid solution until the church grows enough to,
mhm.
pay them. They're committed to this idea. And we're seeing the majority of our new churches starting that way.
Well, that is positive. That is hopeful
Yeah.
to see that kind of shift. I have to tell you that you are so appreciated around the world. I've been teaching church planting in different countries and utilize your resources, and I inevitably will hear from students how much they appreciate your perspective, your kingdom matrix idea of church planting, and your characteristics of a church planter. And so I'm grateful, Jeff, for your ministry and how God has used that in different places. And that's been encouraging because one of the things that I communicate as I'm teaching church planting in these different places is that if you want to be like the Western church, don't change anything you're doing. And that shocks people because they sooner or later will realize, well, the Western church is declining. And we're doing the exact same things that they're doing. And eventually, it might not be right now. They might be, in our 1950s, 1960s growth spurt. But eventually, the 70s, 80s, and 90s come, and then the 2000s. And unless there's a shift that takes place now, then globally speaking, we might be seeing something similar. But anyway, all that to say that you are helping us communicate that with church planters around the world.
Yeah, and Jeff, and Michael as well. That's why I was making the joke a little bit, where I said, that there's no hope in that. When I say that, when I heard that, it's for my context, because here in the South, it's not just there are a few churches that are doing well. It's that a lot of churches are doing well with the big attractional model. And so to say this isn't going to last is like everyone around you going, what? It's doing just fine. And it's the same thing too, Michael, like, hey, this isn't going to last. And everyone's like, we've got 60 years before it may not last. So let's just keep going. And so
I think they'll find it's not 60 years.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that is
the level of drop off that we measure is a cliff. It's not and so it's like a slow, and then just and it's staggering.
And this is bringing up the conversation that we've had many times on other podcasts with many other guests. It's changing that scorecard. What are we saying is, hey, our church is healthy. Hey, we're doing well. What we've talked about on this is seeing people go from death to life.
Yeah.
What is that scorecard looking like?
Yeah.
And continuing to pursue God's glory over and over throughout the relationships that He has put us in the cities that we participate, that we live.
I like that word we were playing around with, Michael, retrodoxy, and figuring out, it's orthodoxy when it assumes Christendom, and how is orthodoxy, and then looking at that first, second, third century, what was happening there. The best example, when I was thinking about COVID coming, I did a series called "We Were Made for This," and because we were, the second, third century, better than anybody, the way the church boomed after those two pandemics, one, I think 15 years, one 12 years, correct me, but it just boomed because the church was made for this. And how did we react? Well, not with retrodoxy. We reacted with orthodoxy. We said, no, the church isn't really a church unless we're gathering. and we couldn't gather, and so we protested, and we were the fly in the ointment of what was going on, instead of going and making Facebook groups of our neighborhood saying, we're going to pastor to shepherd this neighborhood, see if there's any needs here, we're going to meet them, and just approaching this altogether differently, and we missed it.
Yeah. Well, that was, I think, a fatal mistake on our part during COVID, is that we made the really unsubstantiated assertion that the church grows during plagues, thinking that we were suffering through a plague like the early church. But the significant difference was the early church was already on a trajectory of growth, and it just continued to grow. And it stepped into the gap.
And from what I read, I mean, you would know, but they were opening their homes up, and the Romans were kicking the people with the sniffles out, and they were bringing them into their home, giving them soup and water and feeding them, getting them back to health. And all of a sudden, 1 Peter 3:15, what hope do you have that nobody else has, And
yeah. And here we were during our plague thinking about how do we get back to the status quo?
Yeah.
Well, gosh, Jeff, it's been great to have you on. Again, so thankful for what you're doing and what you've spoken into the life of the church in Canada, but also here in other places around the world. So we appreciate you, brother.
Well, I appreciate your voices. It's fun to be amongst kindred spirits.
It is good to see you. It's good to hear from you and be encouraged by you again. Already, it was a subject of conversation. If you have been, as a listener, excited by what we've talked about, go buy Jeff's book. Once you see, order that, order a few copies and pass it around. And I would really very much encourage almost a communal reading and talking through some of these things, because the book is a wonder. I couldn't stop talking about it, at least for 6 months after I read it. I was kind of trying to force it in people's hands. So I hope that you, the listener, have that same experience. Get it.
The book itself has a discussion guide in the back that's designed for, it's kind of two wings, go left or right. If you're in a small group, how do we pull this off? Or if I'm the leadership of a church, how do we torque our church to look more like this? So there's a discussion guide at the back of that to help.
Well, fantastic. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us again. Your 5-timer hat, we had to look back at the roll to see how many times, and then we'll get the design going.
All right, I can't wait to get that. I'll be checking my mailbox daily.
This is going to be great. Well, thank you also, listener, for joining us. If you were excited that Jeff Christopherson was with us on this podcast, and actually this is your first podcast, we certainly invite you not just to listen to all the other Jeff episodes, but look through our catalog and see what topics or things are interesting to you. Listen to those, and then we invite you to go to Ephesiology.com, see what else we have as resources there for you by way of encouraging, equipping, that sort of stuff. We certainly understand that not every believer will be at that full-on seminary level, but we want to be prepared to equip those who God is wanting to take that step. So go over to masterclasses.ephesiology.com. We want to really do our part to raise up this next generation theologically, to continue to pursue what God does have for them in their context. Please go and check that out. I know it'll be an encouragement for sure. So for Michael, for Jeff, and myself, thank you for doing theology in community with us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.